More now on this story about Optus and the ACCC's legal action against it. A majority of those affected are First Nations customers living in remote and regional areas and customers living with disability or in disadvantage. Solomon Bahani is a community lawyer with Darwin Community Legal Service and he joins us now from Darwin. Solomon Bahani, welcome. So how do you feel about companies taking advantage of people in Indigenous communities?
Firstly, Joe, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. The news is obviously distressing. I can't really comment on the ongoing legal action. However, it's always disappointing to hear if there is when there are potential allegations of unconscionable conduct towards First Nations communities or people with disabilities.
Yeah, and what are some of the cases that you've come across over the years?
So we've had a very diverse range of matters, not specifically just Optus, just with telcos in general. Examples have been clients where they've let a telco salesperson know of a certain condition that they might have and still be supplied with certain products that they may not need. We have some examples where there were multiple devices or subsequent contracts for different devices over recurring visits to the telco stores.
Yeah, and for how long have you been coming across these kind of issues?
So it's just really regular stuff that happens every now and then. It's not the most frequent thing that we deal with, but it does happen with a degree of frequency.
And has it happened in other industries as well, apart from telcos, of just businesses taking advantage of people in remote communities? I know there was a funeral insurance case a while back.
Correct. So generally, just in my experience, where there are practices that are questionable, those practices are disproportionately perpetrated against First Nations people or people with disabilities or mental health issues. One example that I could give is consumer leases or consumer credit contracts as well, where I guess really the takeaway here is that there isn't enough support around to deal with these issues. So I think one of the key things to address it would be if there was more funding for community legal services and financial counsellors to deal with this sort of conduct.
Yep. And what kind of effect has it had on people in your experience? Do you have kind of actual contact with the individuals who've been kind of duped into these contracts?
Correct. So the concerns are normally that the consumer doesn't understand what they're entering into or the arrangement that they're entering into. Some of the questions here that can arise are that sometimes the consumer could be under something called an adult guardianship order, or they may have impaired decision-making capacity. So there's firstly that question whether they should have actually even been permitted to enter into the contract in the first place. And there's obviously that lack of awareness on the part of the salesperson or the person pushing the product or service, so that they may enter into these things without knowing or asking or questioning whether the person actually has the capacity to enter into it. With First Nations people, the big concern is that language barrier.
Right.
It's obviously we're dealing with many different nations with many different languages. Maybe English is the third or fourth language of the consumer. And normally they're being given a written agreement and they may not understand what they're exactly agreeing to or whether the service would suit their needs.
I think you've seen the Optus statement. They've come out saying they're extremely sorry for what's happening. Some people have been sacked and they think that it's terrible what happened. Does it feel, as someone kind of working at the coalface of this, does it feel like now to you that the overall business culture is changing and companies are more aware that this is just not on because of the notoriety of cases like this?
So again, I can't really comment on this matter as it's ongoing,
No.
but what I'd have liked to see is that these sorts of instances or events just don't occur in general. I think that's really the goal here.
Yeah, and yeah, what more? I think you've already mentioned one thing, that's funding for agencies like the one that you've got, but could anything more be done to stop this kind of thing happening in the first place?
Well, in the absence, and it's a very good question, Joe, but in the absence of funded support to help people that may fall victim to these schemes in general, these hypothetical schemes that we're discussing, um, one thing could be enabling them to self-represent, to pursue recourse on their own. Now, the issue with telecommunications services in general is that they're exempt from the consumer guarantee scheme that we have. This is a set of legislative consumer protections that a consumer has. It covers things like whether a product is of acceptable quality. In respect of telecommunications services, something that I think could really apply, especially to consumers in First Nations, remote First Nations communities, is the consumer guarantee that a service will be fit for its particular purpose. So that's a protection that's not afforded because of the exemption in the Australian consumer law. But where it could apply would be if a salesperson knows that the consumer resides in a remote community and they're aware that that community would not be covered by the service, so there would be no signal. There could then be an argument put forward or a claim to basically seek to have the contract rescinded.
Yeah, that would seem to be fairly reasonable. Okay,
Yeah.
Solomon Bahani, thanks so much for talking to us. It's been really interesting hearing from you.
Oh, thank you, Joe.